Tuesday, the 23rd of July. I must have overdone it. I've overexerted myself today. Wow, it is warm. I just looked on the phone, it's reading 38 degrees. So it's 1:38, you could say. But this comes down to perspectives. I can sit here and moan how hot it is. But I can also consider what I see in the external news reports of flooding in China, flooding in the Netherlands, flooding in Toronto, what else? Hailstones in France, volcanic eruptions in Italy. And my heart goes out to those people. They've had their peace taken away from the world, you could say. So I don't feel I can moan about the heat. And further to that, this comes from, nice to see a new video from, what's her name? Oh dear. Dana Ashley, I believe. And she talks about saunas, and whilst it's like extremely warm today, and I'm sweating, it's like, well, there's maybe a positive to this, that some of the foods and things I eat, which have barcodes on, of course, I may be sweating out whatever's in that food, and it's helping speed up a process. This physical being does not like damp or cold weather, so what is there really to complain about? There is nothing urgent, nothing that can't wait. The only thing I really have is watering of plants to do, and of course feeding the cats. They're quite happy at the moment. Here's Junus. They're getting rather big. 4 months old now. They've had their run round and exhausted themselves for a while, and they'll probably come back to life again later when it's a bit cooler. It's an observation of nature as well. They instinctively know the cooler places to sort of lay down, and then look at the body posture. They stretch out rather than curl up in a ball, so they're getting an airflow around them, keeping themselves cool. Anyway, on to the topic of this video, the subject of a missing 1,000 years. Let's examine this, and I'm going to do this from a perspective of personal testimony, of experience, and also examine how this idea has even come about, because I can see how it has come about. So if I use my sort of perception, which I hold of feelings, this is purely from the rational as well. So at school you get to know of the Bible and several thousand years of back history of things going on in the Middle East, desert areas, and Rome, and the classic images you get of Roman centurions with what look like upside down paintbrushes on a helmet, and a tunic and a leather pleated skirt, and that type of thing. You get mention of Greece. You get maybe a paragraph on the Anglo-Saxon period, and then you get the Norman conquest in 1066, and then you get very little again really until sort of 1500s onwards. So you could say from that perspective, the system education perspective, really there's a missing 1,000 years, because what really do you know about before 1500, apart from odd bits, mentions of an event or whatever? So of course then there's such things as inscriptions, and people have cited it'll have a date, and it'll be a J instead of a 1, 1584, so it will be expressed as J584. So conjecture from that is that there's a missing 1,000 years, which is sort of then backed up with look at the Renaissance paintings of biblical scenes with medieval backgrounds, and they're wearing medieval clothes. Therefore, there is a missing 1,000 years. But that's a very superficial look at it. Let me explain why. And this is personal testimony. This is things I've tangibly held or touched that I'm using. I'm just going to turn the solar motor off because it'll probably start whirring and make an awful noise in the background. So I spent about 17 years looking at genealogy, and this is based on my assumption of when I've gone into record offices, I'm given these unique books, these parish registers, holding them in my hands. They're on parchment rather than paper, the very early ones. We're talking a date range of, say, 1548 onwards. And in those earliest entries, it reflects the missing 1,000 years in the little information that is actually in those earliest entries, say for a born, B-O-R-N-E, as it's written in those registers, in the era sort of 1548 up to 1590, shall we say. Or it'll have a baptism date, and it'll read something like John Smith, the son of John, and then the Smith will maybe spelt Smythe with an E on the end, or it'll have a Y instead of an I, and it's like, well, that doesn't seem to make any sense. Why has the son surname got a different spelling to the father's surname, although it's both basically Smith? And then it'll have a date, and not even the mother's name is recorded. Sometimes it'll even just say John Smith was baptized or born and then a date, not even the father's name. And then over the years, more and more information is added until it became under, I'm trying to think of the word, civil registrations, government involvement came in, and then there were pre-printed forms asking for specific information to be put in boxes. With these earlier registers, there was not even a standard that they're written in English, so there is a sort of requirement to have a sort of understanding of Latin. So rather than writing the word first, they might write the word primo or ultimo for the last day of a month. I've even seen recording of a date of February the 30th. This is to do with the use of two calendars that are being expressed. But a lot of these dates, if you're expressing the first of a month when there's a baptism or a marriage or a burial, it will be written as an I. Likewise, with a 2, it will be expressed as I in its written form in these registers. Now, I can only give you an assessment handling these registers that they do seem to be genuine, unique copies from that time. I'm not a scientist. I don't think they'd allow me to, even if I knew what to do, could I make a scientific analysis of these registers and determine that they are genuinely from, say, 500 years ago? The answer is no. I have to base it on the information I have. But to all intents and purposes, these registers do appear to be from the era that they are recording this information. There's something to keep in mind with all of these things. So the 3rd will be expressed as I. But the 4 was very often recorded as IIIJ. So that you can see that there is no real distinction between the I and the J when expressing numbers in these registers from this period. We're talking, the ones I've seen that I can sort of recall are around 1580, 1590. Because of the registers that I was looking at, which were basically smaller settlements, i.e. villages, you can often get maybe just 4 baptisms in a year, so the dates will be spread out. So what is not apparent are 2 critical pieces of information. And this is also backed up with what is shown in monumental headstones, what is carved into the actual stone. I'll come to that in a moment. But in 1582, the spring equinox was slipping back under the Julian calendar. So there were 10 days removed from the October of that year. So March the 11th became March the 21st, presumably from 1583 onwards from that. This is all obviously done by the church. Then, and this is one that is mentioned on these sort of helpful hints leaflets that you can get in UK records offices. They're normally free. They're little guides on if you're doing family history, and they will mention about the calendar change in 1752, where September the 3rd to the 14th was skipped. There's 11 days missing. It goes from September the 2nd to the 14th. So added with that 10 days that are removed from 1582 on the Gregorian and the earlier Julian calendar, you've got 21 days that are missing, not 1,000 years. The 1,000 years is a perception of what we're told about history, effectively. But I can see why people have made the assumption about the I and the J, where it's replaced the 1, and then concluded from that there's 1,000 years missing from history. You could even go as far as to say that prior to your individual existence, if you run with the idea this is all a simulation and a hologram, how do you know that any of the backstory is even real? But coming back to the point of this, because this is from personal testimony, what you have with the calendars, you have the calendar you have today, the Gregorian calendar, so January the 1st is the start of the year. But the church records, the parish registers, the baptisms, the marriages, and the burial records, they run an ecclesiastical year that starts on March the 25th. Now, as well as these parish registers, there was generally a much neater written copy on parchment of all different sizes. Some are very long ribbonnated, some are a lot squarer. It's like they've been roughly cut with scissors from this parchment. And these will be titled A Year from Lady Day, whatever year it is, to Lady Day of the following year. They're bishop's transcripts. They're copies of the registers that went to the bishop. Therefore, they're written a lot neater and easier to read. But often, if it's illegitimate children, they seem to be left off of these transcripts. Maybe it was, if there was too many illegitimate children, there was a dim view taken through the hierarchy of the church to the local incumbent. So that was, I would guess, would be the reason that they would not record all the illegitimate children. There's not a lot of consistency with these early registers. There was, in the 1700s, there was a decree that they had to be written in English because some of them are expressed in Latin and in Roman numerals with the dates. Hence, again, the I and the J. But so if the ecclesiastical year starts on March the 25th, say, we'll take the year 1691. So from March the 25th, 1691, for the rest of the calendar year, And then January the 1st to March the 24th would also, of 1692, would also be classed as part of 1691. Now, I have seen this on a headstone, which I've actually touched as well, because sometimes it helps to actually trace the carving. And this specific headstone had I think it was a burial, and it had the year expressed as 1691/2. And the sort of ignorant answer was, oh, people couldn't read or write, so they didn't know what year it is. But that's because of not looking any deeper into this. It becomes clear that what is actually happening, and it's reflected in the way the registers are written. They will start the year 1691. The first entry may be March the 25th or a later date. But then that year will roll on and include January, February, and the majority of March under that year, 1691, and then 1692 would start on March the 25th. And this pattern was perpetuated in the registers. Then you've got 1752, when you've got these 11 days removed. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you think about it, when you look at the zodiac, it's January the 21st of each month that the zodiac starts. So for the implication of that, prior to 1582, the month and the zodiac month started on the same date, which would be the 21st by a modern day perspective. There's some other things that come out of these registers that I feel are also worth sharing, and that is the experience and the feeling. Particularly with these earlier registers that are written in ink on parchment, because every now and again you'll get a page or a folio, as it is called, with a hole in it. And then the realization is what you're actually handling is animal skin. But then, if I reflect what paper is made from, it's a sliced up dead tree. Just something, there's a feeling about it when you have that realization about it. So therefore, what you could say, which is reflected in the birth certificate, because it is headed Register of Births and Deaths on a birth certificate, that these registers are books of the dead. The one that really stands out from 1752, I think it's the Rose Marriage Act that enabled this. The marriages were separated into pre-printed books, and from that year, the bride and the groom would actually then sign or make their mark, so they would therefore physically touch those register books. And there is a different feeling from those handling those register books for the marriages as opposed to the burials and the baptisms that have a very different feel about them. So, to recap over this again, there is no missing 1,000 years as such. What there is scant information of those 1,000 years. And then from that is conjecture and assumption, using things that would seem to point in that direction, which can be shown to be untrue. This being done by looking at original sources. Now, you may think a book of 500 years of age would be difficult to actually view or to even handle. Certainly in the UK, the records offices are fairly autonomous from county to county. Some counties, I believe Surrey, came to some arrangement with Ancestry.com, and there are digital images of the original registers that are far clearer. So you can zoom in, obviously, with the digital technology, and you can far more closely examine where the ink may have faded, and you you can correct quite a few mistakes due to the handwriting and such a thing as secretary hand, which to the modern eye would look very strange. But I self-taught myself to decode that and be able to read it. But of course, with these registers, which are unique books, there is only one copy of, say, the baptisms of a particular parish. There's bishop's transcripts, and some of these books have been lost, and they survive only in their transcript form, which were written annually. So they are authentic to the time as well. Excuse me. So the whole thing about 1,000 years missing is just pure speculation. If you think about it, like I said, with the basic school education, what really do you know about most of anything prior to 1500? But while I was contemplating this, the word Renaissance came into the mind. You'll notice round about 1500, the change, maybe a little bit later, the change in art, where prior to that period, the idea of perspective of a building is more childlike and lacking. But then it becomes more technical. Then you get these beautiful, highly detailed, well, they're said to be drawings or engravings, things like in Gray's Anatomy that show the interior of the human body, how what is shown in art, how you've got this sudden leap. But I was thinking of the etymology Renaissance, and just playing with how I say it, resonance. I'm hearing resonance in Renaissance, but I'm also breaking it down, re. So, like you get it with a letter or heading for an email, this, remind, remember. It's so Renaysense. Because why would you have stories of allegedly 2,000 years ago now being expressed in art, in medieval costumes and medieval buildings in the background? That is almost saying it is recreating Renaysense. Because the biblical history, if taken in a literal and material way, makes absolutely no sense unless you believe there are talking snakes. People were running around in the desert with quintessentially English names like Philip and Mark and Paul and so on. It's all rather perplexing, but remember that all these things are, whilst fascinating, like everything else with history, it is fascinating, and there is a sort of inbuilt desire to know, and there is something to be gained from it, because when you can see that things just repeat over and over again, I would suggest Renaysense, that pretty much anything you look at in this reality externally doesn't make sense. And it is reinforcing the Renaysense. You could say it is happening now with the way things are going. Quite disturbing when I hear calls for going back to a more traditional type of Christianity. What extreme would that go to? Are we going to see witch burnings? People basically being set fire to? Oof. Is that what people want? Because things that have happened in the past, an event that sort of became major news and had a huge impact in 2020, for example, looks to be a repeat of things that have happened in history, particularly in Europe. One of them involved dancing. I think we I don't need to say any more. I think you can draw the dots between all that. But one theme I do notice that is consistent is, why is some of these things called great? I can understand that using the word great in a perspective of huge, large, but great, like the Great Fire of London, I would suggest it should be Grate, because it ends as charred remains, and that seems a theme that very much a sort of Roman theme. If you disagree with Rome, then you get burnt, or burnt at the stake at one point. I would like to see a pattern broken, that history is not repeated with things like that. It's not something I wish to see in my world, and I really hope that it's not something you wish to see in your world as well. But that's sort of going off on a bit of a tangent. But this is my testimony that from the evidence that I have seen, and having this information about the missing days, and why, and how it can sort out this confusion over dates and things. I mean, I know that outside the UK it may be different, but there are such things as archives that hold these documents. Whether you are actually able to see them, whether you are actually able to handle them, will depend on the individual area. But they are things you can go and verify for yourself. You also have digital images of original registers that you can see. Now, I can see the advantage of that, because obviously these are unique books, and therefore the less they are handled, the better, because of the antiquity of these books. But it also does leave things open with digital images, that they can be manipulated, of course. So it's striking a balance between the two. But then you've also got the physical evidence of what is inscribed on headstones. That is another interesting topic in itself. Let me give you an example. As I understand it, many of the monumental masons were illiterate, and this seems to be reflected in the earliest headstones that I could find, that they do seem to be faithful copies of somebody's handwriting who has given them this thing and said, copy this as an inscription on a piece of stone. But over the years, things have become more standardized, and I believe these days headstones are all machine cut. Gone are the days of the chisel and the hammer. But you can see in some of these earliest headstones, a surname may be split across two lines, because it would seem to confirm that it's an illiterate mason that is inscribing, and therefore if they couldn't read or write, they would not know, or maybe they couldn't work out how much space they would need to fit all these letters on a line, and then find they can't and have to split them. I've seen some very clever modifications where something would seem to be copied wrong. Maybe the monumental mason has jumped a line with his eye while he's copying, and then realised and had to correct it. And it's fascinating how very well engineered. It's almost like they're putting a little square into this stone. Some of these stones are braced with iron as well, particularly double headstones. But there's physical evidence, and you can find the dates are expressed with a J or an I in place of the one on these headstones, certainly up to at least the 1750s. So if you can find them, which is far easier to do in the UK in old churchyards, there's still enough of them survive, and they do contain some valuable information. They do give you slight insights. There may be little verses and things. An example I can quote here is seeing the word partner to describe a wife on a double headstone. And if I remember rightly, this is from, I can't remember the date, but this is from, I think it was about 1664. And I always assumed partner is quite a modern term, but that shows that partner is not a new term, which I found quite amazing. But remember, all this fascination with history, whilst it is fascinating, it is then going to draw you away from where it really all needs to take place, which is inside oneself. As much as anything else, so you find that inner peace. So things are not in conflict in the mind, because you can see history is repeating. If we were to take the flood, but now we're doing it in a technological age, so it's a flood of information. So whilst there is truth being put out, a lot of it is also being muddied with lies as well. And I'm not saying that everybody that is saying there's 1,000 years of history is lying is a shill. I believe that many of them are doing it because that is what they believe is real based on the information they've got. But it does come back to checking sources. Always go back to source, as much internally as much externally. So the authentic, unique books, the parish registers for baptisms, marriages and burials, you've only got to look at those and you can see for yourself there is the evidence that the I and the J and the 1 are totally interchangeable, and therefore there is not 1,000 years of history missing. So I hope that has put this whole, what is becoming an urban myth, to bed, because it will mislead. How does it mislead would be the question from this, because within that 1,000 years will become apparent repeating patterns. I feel also this is why there was this adjustment of taking the 11 days and the 10 days out of the calendar, because there was a slippage of the equinox, so it made it difficult to calculate when Easter would come around, and may have started shining a light on something that the powers that are at the time did not want made public. A way of covering up things, I would suggest. So, as always, I'm going to say unconditional love to you all.